Good evening, everybody. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome and give a short introduction to our distinguished lecturer, Arduino Cantàfora, an architect, painter, educator, and poet who traveled not only from another continent, but from another world, a poetical, mythical universe of imaginary places of memory, silence, and resilience, depicted insistingly and beautifully in his magnificent paintings. Arduino Cantàfora's work has become to be forever present on my mind. It has stirred up ideas and feelings and a deep craving for the antique since my early days as an architecture student. Let me, however, note here, to not be misunderstood, if the antique is neither an archaeological nor an art collector's one, but as suggested in Italian language, a time beyond temporal time, a mythical time spanning through history and beyond an antique timelessness forever present in the collective memory of humanity. I like to call it an imaginary antiquity. Arduino Cantàfora's drawings and paintings have indeed had an obsessive thrill upon me. I discovered with awe the intense poetic affinity with this architecture of emotional reason, which has become a constant aspiration and inspiration in my own work and those of many of my colleagues. I came across Arduino's work quite serendipitously, by chance or by accident, in a moment of great cultural confusion. Both profession and academy apparently lost interest in architecture as an art, and traditional, classical, and modern masters and masterworks had equally been evicted from academia. There was no role model, nor master, no inspirational star architect even we could reach out as students for consolation or guidance. There were libraries, however, and a plethora of excellent magazines avidly read by students. It is there where I came across the Italian Tendenza, a movement which took much inspiration from historical precedents and the intelligence of architecture typology and urban morphology derived from the tangible, time-tested, and experienceable reality of surviving historical cities. It is there where many new voices and talents emerged out of a wide and diverse movement, appealing to both practical reason and a refreshed sense of the antique, spearheaded by architects like Aldo Rossi, Giorgio Grassi, Massimo Scolari, as well as Rob and Léon Crier. And Arduino Cantàfora was among this group of early pioneers of awakening from the dull of post-war modernism. I only met Arduino Cantàfora very recently in Milan, however, more than 40 years later, to enjoy a private tour of his exhibition at the Galleria Consadole. I finally got to see the original draft of the fabulous and legendary Città Analoga, frontispiece of the 15th Triennale of Milano, organized by Aldo. And Arduino Cantàfora was so gracious to offer a copy of this painting as a gift, which you can see in our exhibition space. This all happened so serendipitously, logically, necessarily, and naturally, thanks to the gracious and elegant logistical choreography of Anna Cantàfora, who presides over her father's remarkable cultural and artistical legacy. I can still vividly recall the moment when I first saw drawings by Arduino, never imagining in my life I would have a chance of meeting him in person. And I truly believe it to be a miracle that Arduino Cantàfora is sitting right there in front of us, eager to have his lecture presented. We have a wonderful grad student, John Gleason, who will read the lecture, and we will take questions afterwards and translate if that's necessary, if the body language is not enough. Please join me to welcome Arduino, our distinguished lecturer of tonight. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is a great honor for me to be here today at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. I would like to express my deep gratitude to Dean Stefanos, to Associate Dean Samir Younes for inviting me to give this lecture, to Lucien Steil, the driving force behind this event, for the friendship that binds us, and to Carrie Rowley, David Salem, and Jane Uas and John Gleason. A meeting for which I have the desire, especially since I am addressing students, to briefly recount the journey of a life, my life. I explain what happens behind the scenes. It is interesting to understand what helps to build our framework or references and the mental infrastructure that enable certain choices. I do not intend to give you recipes, but to emphasize the importance of consistency in choices and following a guide thread. It is important to know our references and have a supportive entourage. And now, John Gleason, kindly take my place and becomes my voice in English. Thank you, John.
Thank you, William, so much.
Privilege. I'll begin right where our distinguished guest left off. And again, it's my privilege to present your pre-prepared remarks this evening. I would like to ask this evening, together with you, to summon 4 words and ask them for the etymological meaning they contain, because they are very, very important to us. I start with a little provocation for this behind-the-scenes game. I take a shell, the Olivia porphyria. Olivia for its shape, and porphyria because it bears red. Nature surprises us with the Fibonacci sequence and the Archimedean spiral, the same laws that apply from shells to galaxies. It is extraordinary that this principle exists. The shell is full of triangles, as if drawn by a plotter, and each shell has its unique code. It lives in deep waters between the Gulf of California and Peru, and its patterns tell its life story, a mystery that connects us to nature. This is a fundamental aspect. Nature keeps us on our toes, allowing us to make hypotheses without ever revealing everything. Now, a very brief reading from The Soul's Code by James Hillman. In the 5th chapter of Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung speaks of a dream he had during a trip to the United States with Freud in 1909, known as the Dream of the Two Skulls. This dream marked his separation from Freud and shows his house with 2 floors. The upper floor in Rococo style, the lower floor in Renaissance and medieval style, and then a cave with archaic remains and 2 human skulls. For Jung, the dream represented the world of the image. The dream represented, the history of civilization in the human psyche, highlighting the existence of a collective a priori and archetypes. I find this passage fundamental. We are a mixture of voluntary and involuntary forms. The archetypes are behind us, with us, and structure much of our communication. In this sense, everything is image. It goes from the word, the term, to the sign, the drawing. In Latin, image is imago. It is always good to delve into etymologies of Greek and Latin languages to grasp their deeper meaning. Unfortunately, we cannot go back to when a mere tilt of the head, a breath, was enough, to something that was the beginning of this desire to communicate with each other. I once read something very beautiful that said that everything related to heights is expressed with a sibilant language, like, for example, the sky, while everything that belongs to the problematic depths, like the enigma, takes shape in guttural sounds. From here, evidently, a whole world opens around the meaning of sounds. At the origins, in the Akkadian language, one of the foundational languages of Indo-European roots, with Sumerian in the geographical district between the Indus and the Euphrates, Imu means drawing, Itu, contour, Jinnu, seal, image, symbol, allegory. The image is something that certifies. It has the power to give us indications. The image of myself, through which I can cross borders, is my passport. It is not me. It is what I can claim to be. I am according to an image that certifies, with respect to a state, what the state has defined that I must be. The world of the image is this. It is not the thing in itself. It is not the shell, but it is the image of the shell. With the image of the shell, I can allow myself to imagine just by pronouncing its name or drawing a picture of it according to my culture, my way of being. I can invent a whole story around the meaning of the shell and everything that follows. Magritte's 1934 painting expresses this concept well. Indeed, we are not looking at a pipe, but its image. Incidentally, our brain is not capable of thinking in the negative, but is compelled to refer to the thing itself as soon as we think of it. In this specific case, I cannot think of a non-pipe, and this applies to everything. Origo. First, we saw imago, and now we find origo regarding archetypes. Origo the origin is the spring that gushes from the rock. Isn't it an extraordinary image? The origin signifies the act of coming to life and is represented by the primordial gushing. The origin signifies the act of coming to life and is represented by the primordial gushing that continues to repeat itself. The original act is not relegated to a distant time. It is always present and always identical to itself. Water, the vital force, goes together with the verb that shapes the word. The verb is orior, to rise, We orient ourselves in life, and the east is the gaze towards the cardinal point of the east, where the sun rises. Orior and origo are present in our thoughts and actions. An example is Raphael's School of Athens, where Plato holds the Timaeus in one hand and with the other points his index finger upwards, symbolizing metaphysical concepts. The index finger, so called because it derives from the Mesopotamian prefix deik, is the finger that points and communicates, from which the Greek verb deinoumi, to show, and dike, justice, originate. From this come verbs like to say, indicate, and dedicate. Even the German word Dichtung, poetry, associates poetry with a sung speech linked to justice and truth. Aristotle, on the other hand, holds the ethics in one hand and points towards the ground with the other, where ethics materializes in human behavior. And here is dike, justice. I like to remember the verb to feign, which comes from the Latin fingere. Today, it means to stimulate, but originally it meant to shape, like building a wall of clay with your hands. Perhaps finger derives from this primitive meaning. Even hand might derive from an archaic Latin term preceding manus. The beginning of Baudelaire's poem, The Albatross, often for amusement sailors apprehend albatrosses. Seems strange to me that it was not capture, but it is meaning with hands. Our expressions are linked to ancient times. This makes me feel part of a vast world, aware of being a small thing, formed by all that has preceded us. René Magritte's 1934 painting, Conditions Humaines, very effectively expresses this interplay of images. The image in the painting, 1, multiplies, simulating an exterior, and 2, in contrast to an interior, 3, in which a painting, 4, depicted on a canvas, represents the portion of the landscape hidden by the painting on the easel. The whole piece speaks to the human condition, which is compelled, in order to understand, to continually refer to the dimension of images, whether drawn or written, and read or spoken, or all of these combined. This is a land art installation by Richard Long from 1974, a line made by walking, a path created by walking back and forth. The round trip is the existential journey in which, if I keep to the trace, I know where I am going. If I stray from the path, something will disintegrate and I will get lost. In short, I can lose myself in a labyrinth. Drawing nature like Albert Dürer in this extraordinary watercolor is remarkable. In the early 1500s, the tuft of grass depicts dandelion Kentucky bluegrass, plantain, plantago major, and grasses. In this humble fragment of earth, Dürer conveys the complexity of nature with love. Today, a photograph could replace it, but dedicating time to drawing helps one understand better. Imagine Dürer while doing it, just as when he draws the stag beetle in combat, as we see here. The same analytical intensity is found in Leonardo da Vinci's drawings from that period. Another dandelion can be seen in this image. It's a photo I took in Lausanne, in a place where nature doesn't care about the context. It grows regardless. As long as there is a bit of water, even next to a bottle, cigarette butts, and squalid disorder, it must exist. That tiny seed must germinate, must assert its indispensable vital impulse. This is nature, as the word suggests. It belongs to the world of the born. Another tenacious and resilient plant, the acanthus. There are 7 species in nature. Like the dandelion, it is an energetic and vital leaf. And in particular, among the 7, 1, Acanthus spinosus, involuntarily performs a small, great miracle. Here we see it transformed into an architectural form in the Corinthian capital, in a Roman temple of Maison Carrée in Nimes, France. It becomes marble. It becomes an architectural form. It does so because behind every object, every formed shape, there are wonderful stories. There are tales. There are fables. There are myths. And one of these concerns the acanthus. In the 4th book of Vitruvius, the birth of the Corinthian capital is narrated, a story of love and respect. A young girl who died prematurely is visited by her nurse, who leaves a basket with her cherished items on the grave, covering it with a tile to protect it. An acanthus seed grows around the basket. The sculptor Callimachus, seeing the scene, sketches it, creating the Corinthian capital associated with the female figure. Legends give meaning to forms. The Ionic capital recalls the elegant Athenian hairstyle, while the Doric evokes the male body, creating a structural grid with defined roles. The shape of the acanthus leaf will be found in various forms throughout the centuries. One just needs to observe carefully. Here I am with my cousin at the age of 18 months. It's a detail of the house where I was born. I wasn't aware of it at the moment, but behind me there's something that recaptures the harmony of the acanthus leaf. It's true. The world is a vast thing and very complex. We are like in De Chirico's painting, The Two Archaeologists, a sort of mille few of layers, of conflicts in an intricate existential complexity. Another great architect and engraver of the 18th century always signed himself as a Venetian architect and gave a modern meaning to ruins. He revived the image of the imago urbis, or forma urbis, within the pomerium intramuros of Rome, creating, during the reign of Septimus Severus, from 203 to 211 AD, a large map of the city engraved on marble slabs. Originally, it measured 13 by 18 meters and consisted of 150 slabs, but only a tenth remains, fragmented into about 1,270 pieces. Piranesi's etchings emphasize the fragmented and dispersed nature of the work, where the voids are as significant as the filled spaces. His vision suggests that the void is as important as the filled space, and it is up to us to reconstruct it and give it new meaning. Our history, human history, makes me think of other times, other cataclysms, similar to the geological history seen in the formation of breccias. These are composed of volcanic fragments, immobilized in calcium carbonate sediments, creating new and unpredictable geometries. Here, too, fragments of older, broken units come together. We have discussed the image in a general sense up until now. We'll now focus on 2 types of images specific to the world of representation, the shadow and the mirror. In fact, they're the very foundation of it. Larva, anima, animus, psyche. Mnemonic support makes the memory of the absent present. Resemblance and verticality. Eidolon, colossus. Ghost, head. White, shadow. Soul statue, dead. Black shadow, the double. Severance of light, reflection in painting. Umbra, speculum, spectare, to look. The etymological link between the shadow and viewing the reflected image is evident and constructs the indissoluble binomial that exists between the two. Speaking of one indirectly evokes the other. Every representation refers to this. The gaze is the staring point that holds them. The gaze is something extremely complex, which involves not only the eyes, but also encompasses an entire sensory sensitivity that converges there. In a certain sense, sometimes we see more with our nose and ears than with our eyes. It is no coincidence that sometimes we see much more with our eyes closed than with our eyes open. I really like this image by Robert Fludd, a 17th century intellectual and member of the Rosicrucians. Born in 1574, Fludd was a physician, alchemist, and astrologer, influenced by Ficino and Paracelsus. In 1617, in his work Utriusque Cosmi Historia, he presents an image symbolizing the darkness of interstellar spaces and inner depths, enclosed in a small square with the inscription Et sic in infinitum, and so on to infinity. This representation synthesizes the mystery of the macro and the microcosmos, illustrated with a copper engraving. Light, traveling at 300,000 kilometers a second, is visible only when it hits reflective particles, allowing life on Earth. The shadow has symbolic importance, as Plato shows us in the allegory of the cave. Humanity is chained in a cave, seeing only shadows projected on a wall and believing them to be reality. We are slaves to these projections, unable to recognize the deception. The iconophore project the shadows, but if we have the courage to go beyond these conventions, we can see the light behind them. However, to reach the true truth, we must leave the cave and its systems. This idea is beautifully represented in an engraving by Pieter Sijnrudam, a 17th century Dutch painter known for his paintings of post-Reformation Protestant temples. Here is a key image that tells the myth of the bird of drawing and sculpture, the legend of the projected shadow, a symbol of presence and memory of an absence. In the 25th book of Natural History, Pliny tells of the daughter of a potter, Botad, who tranced the shadow of a sleeping young man on the wall to preserve his memory. Traced the shadow of a sleeping young man on the wall to preserve his memory, as illustrated in a painting by Wright of Derby. The light of a fireplace illuminated the scene. Imagining what followed, the potter covered the outline with clay, fired it, and brought it to the temple as a remembrance of a hero. The stick and the dog are clues to the sacrifice of the young man. Thus, a personal memory becomes a collective memory in the temple, the Greek kolossos. An act of love marks the mythical origin of drawing. Here's the story depicted in a painting by Murillo, a slight variation in which an artist is tracing the profile of the shadow, a shadow that he himself is projecting. It is yet another repetition of the myth because it is important to remember things, so it is necessary to repeat them. We do not waste our time by repeating. Here it is again. However, it's a girl who does it, in a completely different context. Here is a radical change in the meaning of a projected shadow, represented by Martin Heemskerk, a 16th century Dutch painter. In 1533, Heemskerk paints St. Luke depicting the Virgin Mary with child in a classical context with architecture and sculptures in perspective. Traditionally, sacred images were arche poeton, not made by human hands, but inspired by divine love. Here, however, the painter's hand projects its shadow on the painting, claiming the creative act as his own. This marks a change in the status of a painter, who asserts himself as creator, no longer excluded from the major arts of the trivium and quadrivium. In the room of Vasari's house in Florence, one can see even more. Vasari, as you know, is not only a painter, but also the theorist who, in a certain sense, inaugurated art history as we understand it today. The one who made the classification from Giotto to Michelangelo. Michelangelo, of course, is at the top of the scale. And here in the fresco, Vasari himself depicts the artist tracing his own shadow on the wall. The trace of an external hand, the hand of the potter's daughter, has become the hand of the artist, aware of his own art. The mirror and the double. The one who looks can now look at himself. Gaze, mirror, image, reflected body, soul, psyche, time, form, death, eros, thanatos, language, time, being, other, and self, difference in identity, relationship with appearance, image, origin, shadow. Alice crosses the mirror, which carries significant myths in our culture, such as that of Dionysus of Zagreus. The Titans deceive Dionysus with gifts, including a mirror. Seeing himself reflected with his face covered in white powder, Dionysus recognizes himself, and at that moment, the Titans tear him apart and scatter him. Zeus, in grief, orders Apollo to recover his brother's pieces, the sema of his brother, and to recompose the soma in the sema of the tomb, the place of memory and the birth of architecture. This mythical event symbolizes knowledge and identification with a context to acquire, belonging to the Orphic tradition of the Eleusinian mysteries. Another fundamental mythical episode for understanding the importance of mirrors is the death of Medusa, narrated in Ovid's Metamorphoses. Perseus, the Athenian hero, confronts Medusa, whose hair is made of snakes and whose gaze turns people to stone. Perseus avoids looking at her directly and uses the reflection of his shiny shield to locate her position and decapitate her. Medusa represents death, and in Greek literature, the sun and death are the two things that cannot be looked at directly without blinding oneself or going mad. We have Narcissus. The myth of Narcissus, told by Ovid in the Metamorphoses, is one of the most beautiful pages in literature. Narcissus is a handsome and lively young man, unaware of his own beauty. He ignores the love of Echo, reducing her to a mere voice. Tiresias had predicted that Narcissus would live until he recognized himself. One day, arriving at an untouched spring, Narcissus sees his reflection in the clear water and, as in the Caravaggesque painting, falls in love with it without knowing it as his own image. Trying to grasp it, he wastes away and finally realizes the truth, saying, "This is me." He lets himself go until death. The myth reflects the unattainability of our reflected image, a theme of self-knowledge and introspection. When Narcissus dies, the mourning nymphs prepare to cremate him. The nymphs, having gone to gather wood for Narcissus' funeral pyre, return to find a flower in place of the young man. The Narcissus with white petals and a yellow corona. Like the Corinthian capital, this fable gives meaning to the world around us. Classical culture constructed stories from observable realities. The Narcissus flower, which reflects the water. This is the meaning of Narcissus, descending from nar, a Semitic term, narun, an Akkadian term, giso. The shrub, kiso, is the leaf stem, and in Greek it becomes narcissos, in whose root there is also narke, which still signifies a loss, that of consciousness, as still found in the same root narc for the word narcosis. In this refined painting by George Friedrich Kirsting from 1827, entitled At the Mirror, we approach the complexity of our relationship with our own reflected image through a simple daily act, that of the character combing their hair. We know that every morning a whole new world opens up. The value of this painting lies precisely in its ability to remind us of the disarmingly repetitive, yet equally profound, banality of everyday life. And here I present you a painting that has long sparked great debate, Las Meninas by Diego Velázquez. It is a 1656 painting of large dimensions, 318 by 276 centimeters. Théophile Gautier, in the 19th century, questioned the meaning of the work, seeing only a moment of life captured in an instant. Interest in Velázquez's Las Meninas increased in the second half of the last century, thanks to Michel Foucault, who, in his book The Order of Things, revived Carl Justi's 1888 interpretation of the painting. Foucault places the two characters reflected in the mirror as external presences to the painting, thereby defining the role of the spectator. The painting is set in Velázquez's studio at the Alcazar of Madrid, where the artist, the official painter of the Spanish court, depicts the scene. At the center, Infanta Margarita is surrounded by her entourage, Dona Maria Agustina Isabella de Velasco, Jose Nieto, a dog. In the background, there are two paintings from Ovid's Metamorphoses and a mirror reflecting the king and queen. This painting reflecting the king and queen, and a scene from Ovid's Metamorphoses there in the background. The question, where is the spectator? Velasquez's position suggests that the fourth wall is a mirror, projecting us inside the painting from the painter's point of view. The reflected king and queen are what Velasquez is painting. Las Meninas makes us participate in the genesis of a work, evoking the relationship with the mirror already described by Leonardo. Velasquez involves us in the creative process, drawing us into the painting. Even with this Venus posed from behind, Velasquez showed us her face by utilizing the projection in the mirror. Here is something that concerns us closely. The intriguing eye of Ledoux, with the pupil projecting an imagined design, represents the famous theater of Besancon. This theater, designed in the ancient style with a colonnade and without boxes, makes the spectators democratically equal, an idea that Boulez might also have conceived. The vision of the idea is identified with the pupil, called chore in Greek, like the maiden abducted by Hades. Chore, daughter of Persephone, Circe, for the Latins, is also to return to Earth for half of the year, while she spends the other half in Hades, according to the pomegranate seed she has eaten. The pupil represents both the girl and the origin of sight, evoking introspection and external observation. Ledoux's engraving of the Besancon theater captures this complexity. At this point, it is worth saying a few words about my relationship with both freehand and instrument-aided drawing. This relationship is linked to the visualization of thought or ideas. The hand translates these ideas into form, following its own logic and reacting to circumstances. The hand is never the same each day. Sometimes it anticipates, other times it struggles to keep up. Drawing is an act of love towards the idea or object, a process of knowledge and appropriation. Manual drawing is unique and personal, with strokes that reflect the drafter's state of mind. Every drawing, from the earliest childhood ones onward, is an authentic code of personality. Drawing with a pencil is an intimate experience involving the wrist and the arm, and it provides satisfaction similar to that of playing. Modern technologies are useful, but they cannot replace the personal component of manual drafting. Each design phase has its ideal tool, and hand drawing remains irreplaceable for certain expressions. The imperfections in manual drawings add quality and uniqueness. The hand is a wonderful tool, refined over millennia. Henri Fauquelin, in his text *The Praise of the Hand*, contained in his work *The Life of Forms*, perfectly expresses the importance and delicacy of the hand in the creative process. And now I begin to show you some of my work done over the span of 50 years, starting in 1980 with a 1984 sketch on the theme of projects for Venice, conceived over the centuries but never realized. This is, as Ledoux, an image where I imagine myself as a spectator on a virtual shore of a mentally plausible but non-existent Venice, from Gian Antonio Silva's Baths on the left to Wright's building for the Grand Canal on the far right. It is an image from which, as we will see, I developed an oil painting as an introduction to an exhibition for the Museo Correr in Venice, whose title was indeed Sia. Now, these are 3 frames of me working on La Città Analoga, and this is the La Venezia, the full painting. The name of the painting, I apologize. In the early months of 1973, Aldo Rossi became responsible for the 15th Triennale di Milano, aiming to create an exhibition that narrates the historical formation of the city through concrete examples, following the principle of his 1965 book, The Architecture of the City. This concept emphasizes the value of formal choices in urban construction, as indicated by Leon Battista Alberti. 2 years after my last contact with Rossi, during my graduation on November 8, 1971, he proposed that I create an introductory painting for the exhibition, synthesizing the sense of historical continuity in architecture. The painting, initially untitled, became known as La Città Analoga. The study of the painting began on 3 copper plates at a scale of 1/10 for etching. The paintings would then be on 3 2-by-7-meter oil canvases and represents a vision of an imaginary city by assembling existing buildings in a purely mental operation, developing the thread of the architecture of reason from the Pantheon to the present day. This is an image taken at night, just before the inauguration, with some of the participants of the Triennale portrayed against the backdrop of my painting. Among them, Aldo Rossi can be recognized by my side, along with the American architects Richard Meyer and Michael Graves. An image that clearly has a foundational debt to the Renaissance ideal cities, particularly that of Urbino. In truth, it wasn't a direct choice, but rather an unconscious suggestion that I realized only in hindsight. The other inspiring image is the Teatro Olimpico in Vicenza by Palladio. With the installation of the buildings in forced perspective by Vincenzo Scamozzi, the actors can move only on the proscenium, as in Greek and Roman theaters, avoiding approaching the buildings beyond the arches to not reveal the accelerated perspective, which creates the illusion of depth. This device is widely used in theater. In Milan, Donato Bramante first adopted this artifice in the Church of Santa Maria presso San Satiro in the 16th century. Not having enough space for the apse, Bramante created a perspective illusion by converging walls and ceiling towards a point on a virtual horizon. Up close, the depth is only 2.5 meters, but from a certain distance, it appears as a deep apse of a Latin cross. This perspective effect has become very popular in theater. Sebastiano Serlio, with his 3 scenes, tragic and comic, based on an urban structure, is fundamental for the connection between Italy and France. A pupil of Raphael, he came to Rome in 1527 during the sack of the city. Many artists who collaborated with Raphael dispersed. Giulio Romano went to Mantua, Sansovino to Venice. Serlio began his important architectural treatise in Venice and completed it in France, becoming a bridge between Italian classicism and French architecture. Philippe Delorme, a key architect of this period, would be very close to Serlio. Here I am, it's 1985, and I am engraving with Paul Villalinos for the cover of Paolo Portughese's magazine Eupalinos. Ici les mêmes sont souvenirs is the inscription I am pretending to carve, taken from the dialogue between the architect Eupalinos and Socrates in the realm of the dead. This inscription has, in a sense, become the guiding principle of my approach. Here we have juxtaposed La Città Banale and La Città Analoga. It's very familiar. Rome. This is also a rather important painting measuring 2 by 4 meters, in which I worked on 3 phases of the city. The city as a collection of vestiges, of memories, the city of history, which is both historical and contemporary at the same time, featuring the period of Caius Caesius, a block in the Garbatella district, the beautiful Casa dei Cavalieri di Malta on the Aventine Hill, a historic suburb, and a more contemporary city at the center. All of this is combined in the diachronic and synchronic complexity of city life. There is also a great debt to a painting housed in the Louvre, which is this one. This refers to the painting of Giovanni Paolo Panini, which presents a very complex vision of what an art collector might have encountered when visiting his Roman studio. Panini, besides being a great painter, was also a prominent art dealer. This is the installation of the painting Roma at the Venice Biennale. I had placed it as if in a waiting room. I love playing in waiting rooms. I don't know why. Not everything can be explained. Some things happen because they are part of us. These are the 2 canvases currently owned by the Pompidou in Paris, and there are 2 Berlin paintings, each measuring 6 meters by 10 meters. They were conceived as a panoramic structure created in 1984 on the occasion of the conclusion of the IBA operation in Berlin. West Berlin, an island within the communist DDR, did everything possible until 1989 to foster culture and construction in every way, and through the IBA initiated a series of projects by inviting architects from all over the world to invigorate the reconstruction of Berlin architecture. The organizers of an exhibition on the history of Berlin and the IBA operation had asked me if I wanted to contribute something. Accepting the invitation, I chose to work on a foreground with the idea of a canal, the Landwehrkanal, or the Mietsgast rental barracks. and place the structures of the IBA realizations in the background. This is during the execution of the paintings in 1984. And these are some preliminary studies of the same painting. Here, when the two canvases arrived in Triennale di Milano in 1987. For an edition of the Triennale di Milano in 1987, I created these two sketches of the different conceptions of the city in the 19th and 20th centuries. These two sketches were then translated into volumetric maquettes for public exhibition. The concepts characterizing them are, for the 19th century vision, the porticoed structure, which rhythmically punctuates the spatiality, while for the 20th century city, it is the fenêtre in horizontal window. Forgive my pronunciation. And allusion to Smear's having a heart attack up here. It's the 20th century vision and the 19th century vision. This painting extends the rhythm, modifies and perceived character, extends the rhythm and modifies the perceived character of the places. The experimental Weissenhof district in Stuttgart is recognizable in the upper left-hand corner. This was a theme I enjoyed a lot. Starting from a beautiful concept by Leon Battista Alberti, the city as a large house and the house as a small city, this equivalence of value between one's domestic space and the city is wonderful. It's not just my home when I close the door, but my home is also the way I inhabit the city. In this sense, an exemplary city is also due to objective conditions. Venice is a city where the boundary between inside and outside is so permeable that I always feel at ease, both inside and outside. So I thought of this painting, a large triptych with a 12-meter base. It is called Città come Casa, dedicated to the city of Ravenna. And I thought of representing the remnants of the past, the presence of the modern, such as the wall that becomes the sky, where I see the mausoleum of Theodoric. And now, there are also fragments of the contemporary city, all mixed together like a theatrical scene. Until, at the end, the city just fades and vanishes, and there in the distance is only the presence of the bell tower of the Basilica Sant'Apollinare in Place. I return to the theme with which I began the presentation of my works, La Venezia Possibile. The Palladian Capriccio by Canaletto, created around 1735, gave me a sense of what I was doing. Canaletto takes the Rialto Bridge in Venice and replaces the built bridge with Palladio's design, which had lost the competition to Antonio da Ponte. Additionally, he includes the Basilica of Vicenza and Palazzo creating a different Venice. This approach inspired Aldo Rossi for his Città Analog. Canaletto's experiments promoted the debate on the revival of Palladian theory, supported also by Joseph Smith, the British ambassador, for Neo-Palladian architectural projects in the colonies. I believe I have started to provide some insight into my way of working. So we can proceed by quickly going through these images without too many comments. These are from my stay in Berlin. These are the interiors that I love very much. There's a whole psychological play involved. It's a theater. These are urban scenes within a theatrical space, but not just that. Here I am playing again with a piece of that painting we discussed, La Venezia Possibile, in a situation where Codusi and Filarete are in comparison. This is La Salute and its relationship with water, which fascinates me greatly. And finally, a few interiors. In 1851, Foucault demonstrated the Earth's rotation using a 32-kilogram pendulum suspended from the dome of the Pantheon in Paris. As it swung, the pendulum maintained a fixed plane of oscillation, showing a change of 12 degrees per hour at the latitude of Paris. This demonstration was later repeated at the Paris Observatory and finally at the Pantheon, confirming that the Earth moves. The experiment began by burning the pendulum string with a lighter. Despite the movements of the Earth and the universe, the pendulum's plane of oscillation remains constant, a phenomenon confirmed by using magnets to sustain the oscillation. This phenomenon represents a mystery of physics, as the pendulum appears unperturbed by cosmic movements. Here is time, the house of time, the house of hours. And then these paintings are less than a year old, and light is becoming increasingly important and prominent in sparsely furnished interiors. And with this full moon, I think it's time for us to say goodbye. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, John. If anybody has questions, comments, okay. All right. Thank you. Oh, Very pleased. Oh, yeah. So do you need the mic?
Thank you so much for that beautiful presentation and overview of your work and the philosophy of your approach to your art. I was particularly struck by the stillness of your paintings and the quiet, the void, if you, as you may have put it. Could you say something about that emotional tone of your paintings? One might even say melancholy of your scenes. That seems to be a consistent theme across many decades of your work. But, your paintings don't include figures or movement, right? I wanted to ask about that emotional tone, the still and the quiet. And
the melancholy is a given fact. There are people who are born melancholic and people become melancholic. The history of melancholy is very long and complex.
Dato fisiologico di disequilibrio. Proprio.
Okay. Yeah, so it's referring to the kind of medical conditions and already kind of explained in antiquity and medieval times, like the various humors, and so we're saying that this figure by Leonardo da Vinci, also with the proportion, which kind of encompasses the four humors, and that's the reason why he's kind of imbalance. Okay, so I was saying also before, that's the part I forgot to say, that the artist in some way is kind of would say consistent with melancholy, and he was also saying that already during Renaissance time, the artist was kind of moving from a balance to a kind of edge situation where he lost this kind of equilibrium and tending towards melancholy. And he was mentioning that some of was it Dürer, painting by Dürer, where the artist already kind of starts suffering and expressing this melancholic suffering, as a condition of the artist.
You're right. And in the romantic movement, Baudelaire, melancholy, absolutely, total.
Also,
in the 19th century is also very, very important. It's a condition involuntary, but for me, I am born 8 November.
It's a sincere melancholic.
The season.
Arduino is a convinced. Oh yeah, is a convinced melancholic. Yeah, but also the.
It's not possible.
I would like to be a happier person, but it's not possible. You're challenging me here with the translation. So, did you understand? Understand? Yeah. I actually had prepared something to read at the beginning about actually exactly the question you were asking, because that's something also that's what attracted me in Arduino's work, but also what I kind of found very intriguing. And the Tendenza architects and artists, they like to present their work as a work of absence. And in some way, I saw that it's even the void. I never kind of understood it as absent, as a kind, I thought it was a presence, a very intense presence, even with a person. So that's something really which I find so fascinating in your work. Oh, do you want?
I have many questions. Can I ask two? The first question is the silence of the work, the melancholy of the work is in stark contrast with the nature of our society, which is in constant motion in one form or another. It's actually incapable of stasis, and your work freezes it. And I'm wondering what the intention behind it is.
So, two main concerns. The one is the image of the city.
The city in the structure of the city and history of the city. And the other one is the space of silence, the space my soul.
Interior.
Oh, okay. And I have due percorsi. Il percorso.
Yeah, so there are two kind of journeys, if you like. One which is a public one, which is the theatralization of the kind of city, And the private one?
And the private is the
Intimate
little
one.
space intimated.
Yeah.
It-
Okay. So, yeah. Okay. So I think this, so just to kind of cut it short, like I think what you're saying is this kind of dialogue between a kind of intimate inner space and the kind of public realm of the city, which is always kind of celebrated in a kind of as a theater. And even without people, because in some way it's the person who looks at the painting inhabits the painting. So it's an invitation to enter into the world, both of the kind of civic world and the intimate world of the painter. And also, he's also saying that more and more he gets kind of intrigued or fascinated by like very minimal spaces, where where kind of the silence is even more intensified, and when you kind of start, and that's something also you saw in the paintings, the light and the shades and shadows, how they speak to you. So there are corners and a window piece, light falling in, and then all it's kind of the poetry of these moments, which I think Arduino is capturing in his more recent painting.
My second question has something to do with La Città Analoga, and as Dean, I would like to thank you profusely with great gratitude for having gifted us this painting. I think that's as an immeasurable a gift that will be there for all time. We thank you very much for that. But you did call it a copy, and I want to ask the question of you about how you think about the idea of authenticity in your work. This painting is drawn and painted 50 years after the original. It's half the size. I'm not sure how close the materials are. I mean, you buy the materials every day, I'm sure. I don't know what your state of mind was and is. This one has traveled across the ocean. There are many, 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 many different produced at different times for two different audiences. Why is one a copy and one an original?
So the original, this is a reduction, and there is a trace, and then he kind of repainted on the trace of a kind of. That's why he calls it a copy.
But it's original because it's other one, with other dimension. And
yeah, so it's original. It's another dimension, and it's painted by hand again, even if there was an outline. So, but still,
it's not the first.
It's not the first copy. It's the original in some way.
It's other original,
Yeah.
so if you want.
Because also what you say, when you talk about the origin, you say the origin is ever present. So in some way, it's a kind of process which is always actual and renewing itself. So in the history of painting, the fact that if a painting is very successful or has a kind of intensity, and so it happens that there are many, many copies. There's one famous example, the Island of Death by Alfred Böcklin, where there are at least four originals or four copies, or whatever you call it, but with slight variations. So, and I think the same happened. De Chirico did many, even falsified some of his paintings.
Exactly. In the last period of his life, is commercial.
It just produced it at so there are many.
Okay.
One more.
Yeah, okay, but
anyone else? I don't want to.
No, the last one.
Interesting question. Are there any more questions back there? Some of us were alive in 1973, and not too many people in this room. But it turns out in the life of the centuries, some years are more important than others. And 1973 is a remarkable year in the history of architecture, and you're right in the middle of it, standing upright and painting it. So 1973, Aldo Rossi, the Biennale, the book preceding it, marks this extraordinary moment in the history of architecture where modernism shatters. Conceptual modernism with a social conscience, which was begun 40 years ago, just breaks up. What did it feel like? What was it like? You were there. You were there. What was that experience like?
Like a mission. Is
was a mission like for the recovery of a new meaning. But was there consciousness? So there was a feeling, there was a kind of acknowledgement of something important happening. So the 15th, so 73 was the 5th Triennale of Milano, and so Arduino says that it was mostly sociology, which has an awareness of the kind of situation, and then architecture became dependent on this sociological kind of illumination. So this Biennale was really the reappropriation of the meaningfulness of the role of architecture, which is transmitted through drawing. So that the both architecture, a rediscovery and reassessment of architecture, but also the reassessment of the graphical interpretation or the discourse on architecture. So it was also accompanied by a reconquest of the graphical languages and culture of architecture through the treatises and through the techniques. So also in the context of Arduino highlights that the title of Aldo Rossi's book was Architecture of the City, not the urban form of the city or the urbanism of the city. Yeah. So again, this idea of rediscovering even the urban forms through architecture. And I think in some way what Arduino is kind of relating to is that the city is a scale of architecture. So the architecture, there's one architecture which kind of is experienced at various levels, and we cannot detect one scale from the other. And I think that's what we're doing here at the school, so that we kind of looking into architecture and the context, whether it's landscape, the territory, the region, and urbanism is always just one different scale or one different level of the same architectural concern.
Albertianamente,
yeah. So the city so the city like Alberti's city as a palace, and the palace as a city, or the house as a city. And so this kind of dialectic between the city and
il confronto è costruito.
Thank you so much.